Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Don't forget, July the 11th through the 13th, Ardmore, Oklahoma, Preterist Pilgrim Weekend 2019. Our theme is How We Know We're Not Living in the Last Days. You want to make your plans to be here. Now, Lord willing, we're going to have it live streamed. As I've suggested to you, we would very much appreciate your help with the expenses of doing that. Last year, we just really had a knockout number of people, tremendous numbers of people watching, what may very well have been the largest audience to ever witness a preterist event. Now, I don't have a way to confirm that, but I know the numbers were very significant. Well, okay, we are continuing our response and refutation of Sam Frost's book, The Parousia of the Son of Man. I've spent a little bit of time on his admission that John the Baptizer was Elijah. And I've shared with you just a little bit, believe you me, just a tiny bit of the incredible eschatological significance of that admission. As I have said, and I will repeat it here, you cannot admit that John the Baptizer was the voice of Isaiah 40, the messenger of Malachi chapter 3, and Elijah of Malachi chapter 4, without surrendering any futurist eschatology. It is impossible to have a futurist eschatology and admit to those realities. And yet those realities are undeniable. I've urged you, let me urge you, go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com. Take advantage of the May 2019 two-book special. One book, Into All the World, Then Comes the End, highly significant in Matthew chapter 24 that we're studying, and Elijah Has Come, a solution to Romans 11, 25 to 27. By the way, if you don't see a connection between the coming of John as Elijah and Romans 11, the salvation of Israel, you're going to absolutely be blown away by this book. If you order the two-book special here in the month of May, it'll save you over $10 over what you would have to pay if you bought them individually. Okay, I must confess to you that just as I was stunned when I read Mr. Frost's admission that John was Elijah, he was the voice, he was the messenger, when on page 15, I read his remarks. Now, I wasn't quite as stunned because I was already familiar with Mr. Frost's view. I had already debunked it and refuted it on Facebook. You may not have seen those exchanges, however. But here in print is Mr. Frost speaking of the day of the Lord of Matthew 7:22. And he says, Jesus does speak of, quote, that day, unquote, Matthew 7:22, when those who claim to know him would be shut out from entering the kingdom. He spoke of a time in which the bridegroom will be taken, Matthew 9:15. There is his claim that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, listen carefully now and catch the power of this claim, are already reclining at the feast table in heaven and will be joined by nations from the east and west, Matthew 8:11, unquote. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I say this with as much respect as possible. One could hardly find a more amazing, self-defeating, and more false theological claim. Now, first of all, let me make this observation. If you admit that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are already reclining at the kingdom table, you have admitted that the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 is fulfilled. How so? Well, Paul's doctrine of the resurrection, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, would be when death would be destroyed, a direct quote of Isaiah chapter 25, verse 8. All scholars agree that Paul is drawing directly from Isaiah chapter 25. But you see, Isaiah 25:8, the day of the resurrection, says, in that day, in what day? In the day in which the Lord would make a great feast, where? On this mountain. That's Zion, okay? So the Messianic banquet would be prepared and enjoyed in Zion in the day that the Lord would destroy death. If Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are sitting at that Messianic banquet now, then guess what? They have been resurrected. And if they've been resurrected, it's pretty obvious they didn't need human biological bodies. Right? Listen, folks, you simply cannot, not textually, not exegetically, not hermeneutically, not logically. You cannot admit that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are already sitting at that messianic banquet, that kingdom banquet, without admitting that the resurrection is fulfilled. Totally destroying Mr. Frost's entire book. Now, by the way, I cover this connection between Isaiah 25, Matthew 8, and 1 Corinthians 15 in my large book, The Resurrection of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 2, Future or Fulfilled, which you can find on my website. Have an extensive discussion, but I must move on. Now, he says that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are enjoying that banquet in heaven. Now, you really must catch the power of what I'm about to share with you. Mr. Frost believes it is fully documented that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, in fact, all of the worthies listed in Hebrews chapter 11, all of the faithful children of God from creation onward, when they died, they went right straight to heaven. And here is Mr. Frost saying that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are already reclining at the at the feast table in heaven. Now, it's one thing to say that they're now reclining at the Messianic banquet after Christ came. It is another thing entirely to say that before Christ ever came, before Christ ever died, before Christ ever made the atonement, that all of those worthies went to heaven. You know, folks, this is one of those doctrines that is just so stunningly bad, so obviously false, that it really honestly is just amazing that anyone would make such a claim. I mean, it's really honestly that bad. Now, how do I know that? Well, let's take a look. Hebrews chapter 6, and I'm going to read this so that you don't lose the impact of it. Okay, I'm going to read from Hebrews chapter 6, good old King James. The writer says, speaking of the promises that God made to Abraham, by the way, keep that in mind because the context is the Abrahamic promises, starting all the way back with verse 13. All right? God made the promises, and he wanted to confirm that promise by two immutable things in which it was impossible for God to lie. We might have a strong consolation who have fled for refuge to lay hold upon the hope set before us. Now watch this. When the writer wrote, the hope that Abraham had was still a hope. It was unrealized. Which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast. Now watch this. Which enters into that within the veil. What? He was saying that their hope, the Christian hope, was within the veil. Well, what does that mean? It means that it was in the most holy place. What's the most holy place? It's the presence of God. It's heaven. Now watch this. The Christian hope was within the veil. In heaven. Catch the power of this. Where the forerunner is for us entered, even Jesus, made a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Wait a minute. Christ, you see a train coming? Christ was the forerunner. Now that's from the Greek word prodromos. And it means the one who goes before. You know, he's the first. No, he doesn't use the word protos. But he uses a word that carries with it the same concept. Christ was the forerunner. He was the pioneer to go in first into the most holy place, the object of the Christian hope. Now, not according to Mr. Frost. According to Mr. Frost, Abel would have been the very first. He would have been the pioneer going into the most holy place, because after all, he entered there before Jesus ever did. But that's not all. In Hebrews chapter 9, it tells us that the way into the holiest of all, that's the most holy place, that's within the veil of Hebrews chapter 6, 18 and following. The way into the holiest of all was not made manifest while the first tabernacle, and literally the first covenant, more properly, still had validity, still had standing. So as long as the old covenant stood valid, binding, and imposed, Greek word epikaimai, there was no entrance into the most holy place. Now watch this. And again, I'm going to read this so that you do not miss the power of it. The Holy Spirit is indicating this. That's at the time the Hebrews was written. That the way into the holiest of all, the most holy place, is, and by the way, all of this is present active indicative, is not yet made manifest while the first tabernacle was still standing. It is symbolic, that's when the Hebrews was written, it is symbolic for the present time, in which both gifts and sacrifices are offered, which cannot make him who performed the service perfect in regard to the conscience, concerned only with foods and drinks, various washings, and fleshly ordinances imposed until the time of Reformation. Do you catch that? No entrance into the most holy place. Why? Because there was no forgiveness. No entrance into the most holy place as long as the first covenant, i.e. Torah, the law of Moses, remained imposed. Well, wait a minute. The law of Moses didn't even exist in the days of Abel, of Noah, of Seth, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now look, folks, sin reigned from Adam to Moses. It was exacerbated under the law of Moses. Well, if there was no entrance into the most holy place, as long as the law of Moses stood, there was no entrance into the most holy place from Adam onward, meaning Abraham, who could only offer animal sacrifices, could not enter the most holy place because, after all, the blood of bulls and goats cannot take away sin. Hebrews chapter 10, 1-4. So here is the writer of Hebrews affirming unequivocally, explicitly, there was no entrance into the most holy place, i.e. heaven, while the law of Moses remained valid. Why? Because there was no forgiveness offered by the law of Moses, and there was no forgiveness offered prior to the law of Moses. I suppose Mr. Frost would say, well, Abraham was justified by faith. Well, he was in light of the coming of Christ, but not objectively. Or else Hebrews is wrong. And then I just have to close with this. When would Abraham sit down at the Messianic banquet? Well, according to Isaiah 25, it'd be at the resurrection. Folks, don't miss the power of that, okay? But in the parallel passage of Matthew chapter 8, in Luke chapter 13, Jesus was speaking to his contemporaries, and he says, when once the master of the house has risen up and shut the door, and you begin to stand outside and knock at the door saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. And he will answer and say to you, I do not know you. Then you will begin to say, we ate and drank in your presence. You taught in our streets. Folks, that's not talking about New York City. It's not talking about Ardmore, Oklahoma. It's not talking about Indiana. We ate and drank in your presence. And thus, Jesus' use of the you here is very personal, very precise. Now watch this. But he will say, I tell you, I do not know you where you are from. Depart from me, all you workers of iniquity. Watch this. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth when you see. Who is going to see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob sit down at the Messianic banquet table, kingdom table? There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth when you see Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the prophets in the kingdom, and you yourselves cast out. They, what's the antecedent reference to they? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They will come from the east and the west, from the north and the south, and sit down in the kingdom of God. When? When you yourselves are cast out. Now, Jesus said Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, along with others from the east and the west, would come and sit down at the kingdom banquet when Israel was cast out. You know, it would be kind of tough, pardon me, kind of tough for Israel to have been cast out in the days of Abraham, since Israel did not exist in the days of Abraham. No, this is talking about the time when the sons of the kingdom, i.e., Old Covenant Israel, was to be and was cast out. That, pardon me, that is when Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob sat down at the Messianic resurrection table. And again, don't lose sight of the fact. When you admit that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are now sitting at the Messianic kingdom banquet, you have admitted that the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15 is fulfilled. You have become a full preterist. Thank you very much. Okay. Folks, thank you so very, very much for joining me for this morning's morning musings. Hey, look, again, for an extensive discussion of the relationship between Matthew 8:13 and Luke 13, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Isaiah 25, 1 Corinthians 15. For an extensive discussion, go to my website, donkpreston.com, and order the book, The Resurrection of Daniel chapter 12, Future or Fulfilled. Be sure to let me know you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll pay your shipping. Well, okay, I've gone on a good little bit this morning, fairly long morning musings, but boy, I hope you catch the power of this presentation this morning. Hey, listen, Monday is Labor Day week, and this is Labor Day weekend. Obviously, I will not be with you Monday. Lord willing, I'll see you on Tuesday. You have a very, very great weekend. Be safe. God bless.